Hello, and thank you for downloading Witness from the BBC World Service. Today we're going back to late 19th century England and a love affair which brought down the great writer and wit Oscar Wilde. Simon Watts reports.
It's April 1895 and Oscar Wilde, the most famous writer of his day, is in the dock at the Old Bailey. He's defending his passion for a handsome young aristocrat called Lord Alfred Douglas.
The love that dares not speak its name in this century is such a great affection of an elder for a younger man as there was between David and Jonathan, such as Plato made the very basis of his philosophy, and such as you find in the sonnets of Michelangelo and Shakespeare. It is that deep, spiritual perfection that is as pure as it is perfect. It is beautiful, it is fine, it is the noblest form of affection. There is nothing unnatural about it. It is intellectual, and it repeatedly exists between an elder and a younger man, where the elder has intellect and the younger man has all the joy, hope, and glamour of life before him.
Wilde's love for Douglas, or Bosie as he was nicknamed, was to be his downfall. In Victorian England, homosexuality carried heavy prison sentences, but when the two men met at a party, the attraction was instant.
Well, at the beginning, certainly there was mutual admiration. Bosie was impressed by Oscar Wilde's early work and was indeed a very good friend to him to begin with, but then the relationship soured.
Jonathan Fryer is a biographer of Oscar Wilde.
It seems that the physical side of things died out pretty early, but Wilde became more and more obsessed with Lord Alfred Douglas, and Douglas played on this and realised that he could use Wilde not only financially, but also emotionally, that he could use him against his own father, who Bosie detested.
Bosie's father, a rich and eccentric aristocrat called the Marquis of Queensberry, was determined to stop his son from seeing Oscar Wilde. He threatened violence, then tried to expose the writer by leaving a card at his club reading, "To Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." In response, Wilde took the dangerous step of taking Queensberry to court for libel. To preserve his good name, he'd have to persuade a jury that his homosexuality was not physical, but the higher classical love of an aesthete for a young man.
Bosie was determined to try and bring his father down, to send his father to prison, basically, and therefore he was urging Wilde to sue his father for libel. Now, Wilde's best friends said, "You're crazy. This will bring terrible dishonour upon you and disaster." But Wilde preferred to listen to the man that he loved.
Is there also, though, an element perhaps of arrogance to Wilde, that he believes that in a courtroom he can triumph as he was then doing in the London theatre?
Definitely. He was, of course, at the height of his fame. In a sense, he was the first modern celebrity and much courted at dinner parties and salons. Since I think he did believe, actually, he would get away with it.
But in court, Wilde faced a formidable opponent in Edward Carson, Queensberry's lawyer. Carson took Wilde through the details of his relationship with Bosie. To laughter in court, he ridiculed a letter which Wilde had written after a tiff.
"Dearest of all boys, you must not make scenes with me. They kill me. They wreck the loveliness of life. I cannot see you, so Greek and gracious, distorted with passion. I cannot listen to your curved lips saying hideous things to me. You break my heart. Shall I come to Salisbury? My bill here is £49 for the week. I've also got a new sitting room. Why are you not here, my dear, wonderful boy? I fear I must leave. No money, no credit, and a heart of lead. Your own Oscar." Is that an extraordinary letter?
Everything I wrote is extraordinary. I do not pose as being ordinary, great heavens. Ask me any question you like about it.
Oh, I'm afraid I have a great deal to ask you. Isn't that a love letter?
It is a letter expressive of love.
Is this the kind of letter a man writes to another man?
It was a tender expression of my great admiration for Lord Alfred Douglas. What other men write to other men, I do not care.
The crowded court cheered Wilde throughout these exchanges, but the mood darkened when Carson moved away from the world of art and high society to another side of Wilde's life. The writer didn't know that Queensberry had hired private detectives to investigate a saloon of male prostitutes run by a former public schoolboy called Alfred Taylor. Carson implied seediness at every turn.
Were his rooms strongly perfumed?
I don't know how you mean. How perfumed? He used to burn perfume in his rooms, charming perfume.
Did you know the tailor had a lady's costume there?
I don't know at all.
Did you ever see him with a costume on, a lady's fancy dress?
No, I have never, no.
Sure?
Quite sure.
Then Carson cross-examined Wilde about his meetings with the young men he'd been introduced to by Taylor. Wilde, the court learned, had given silver cigarette cases and meals at the Savoy Hotel to men from a very different social class to Bosie.
How old was Parker?
I don't keep a census.
Was he an educated man?
Culture was not his strong point.
Did you know that Charles Parker was a gentleman's valet and his brother a groom?
I did not know it, but if I had, I should not have cared.
Did you give them plenty of champagne?
They had whatever they wanted.
You did not stint them?
What gentleman would stint his guests?
What gentleman would stint his valet?
At this double entendre, there was raucous laughter in court. Then Carson played his ace. Charles Parker, the valet, was in the Old Bailey and ready to testify.
Was it a favourite drink of yours, iced champagne?
Yes, strongly against my doctor's orders.
Never mind your doctor's orders, sir.
I don't.
What I would like to ask you is this. What was there in common between you and a young man of this class?
I will tell you, Mr. Carson, that I delight in the society of people much younger than myself. The mere fact of youth is so wonderful that I would sooner talk to a young man for half an hour than, well, be cross-examined in court.
Then do I understand that even a young boy you would pick up in the street would be a pleasing companion to you?
Oh, I would talk to a street Arab if he talked to me, with pleasure.
Did any improprieties ever take place between you and Mr. Parker?
None whatsoever.
Parker himself will be here, and the jury will see him.
The fact that Parker might talk openly about being paid for sex by Wilde was a bombshell. There was uproar in court. Wilde's legal team now realised their client had lied to them and that the Marquis of Queensberry had dug up enough dirt to win the case.
It was essentially a dramatic crux as far as Wilde's defence team was concerned, because the lawyer had been told by Wilde that there was no truth to the Marquis's allegations. It was a bit of a shock suddenly to know that the Marquis had actually set private detectives to round up and indeed to pay witnesses. So they were probably to a certain extent unreliable witnesses, but nonetheless it was enough for the defence counsel to say to Wilde, well, look, Mr. Wilde, you're in danger of losing this case, and if you do, then Crown Prosecution Service will certainly charge you with gross indecency offences, and therefore we must halt the case. And then outside the courtroom said to him basically, get out of the country. And there was a bit of connivance with the authorities. They didn't issue the arrest warrant for several hours in order to give him time to get on a train to Paris.
Why didn't Wilde go then if he had the opportunity?
The main reason was Bosie, who was basically saying, you've got to choose. If you run away to France and you don't go ahead with this, then basically you are betraying me.
Ever loyal to Bosie, Wilde stayed in London to face a criminal trial. He was convicted of gross indecency and served 2 years in prison with hard labour. After his release, Wilde went into exile in France. His relationship with Bosie never really recovered. Oscar Wilde died in 1900 of complications from a fall in prison.
Simon Watts. For details of our complete range of downloads and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.